Thank you very much for joining us tonight from wherever in the world you are. Here is, I wish you a good evening here from the UK. And we are very happy to have Laura with us tonight. She very kindly accepted to speak with our community. I'm Adriana Silva. I'm the Community Director for the London and Southeast IIBA UK, for IIBA UK chapter. And we are very pleased to have Laura with us tonight. I believe Laura, I feel a bit redundant trying to present Laura, to introduce her, because she's a beacon in our profession. She's a very well-established and known professional. She has her reputation, her name that goes ahead of her. We all have seen all her amazing contributions to the profession, her amazing contributions on LinkedIn, and the work she does, and all the great insights she shares so kindly and generously with us. So without any further delay, I will pass it to Laura so she can make the most of this time with us. Thank you, Laura. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Adriana, for organizing and promoting and doing all you do for your chapter in the UK. Usually I see like a green line around the slide I'm sharing. So I just want to confirm that everybody can still see my slide. It seemed to have gone away at one point. Okay, we're still good. Good. It would not have been the first time that I started presenting without sharing slides. So I just always like to double check. So thank you so much. I always love to hear, what type of role you're in, if you want to share that in the chat. And if there's people who are joining not from the London IIBA UK area, I think that is always interesting to know as well. It's so cool to have these both locally focused yet globally available meetings, especially at a time like this, which is very accessible across a wide range of the world. So always like to know who's joining in the chat if you're willing to share. Adriana shared about me, but just, I've been doing this for quite some time in the business analysis world. Founded Bridging the Gap back in 2008, where we offer resources, particularly online training, to help people start, succeed, and excel in business analyst careers. I do have a book called How to Start a Business Analyst Career, and I am on the cusp of releasing a new book called The Value-Driven Business Analyst, which is going to go into more detail about the Business Analyst Blueprint framework, which is the foundation of the main training program that we offer. But really, all of this is about empowering business analysts to amplify their impact and thrive in their careers. And that's actually very core to what we're talking about today. So see lots of people in the UK. Awesome. Well, welcome. Oh, great to have you here. Currently studying to be a business analyst in an apprenticeship. And somebody from Illinois. So I am in North Carolina in the United States, and I didn't share that in my introduction. So very excited to be also speaking internationally. I think it's so important in this time to maintain our global connections as well. So this talk is about the BA success framework. So what we'll be going through today is the 8-step business analysis process that we teach at Bridging the Gap, which is really the key responsibilities of a business analyst, but more importantly, how this work adds value to an organization. So we'll look at some techniques and practices that support each of the 8 steps in the framework. And I also, because AI, I feel like we need to always be talking about AI, whether you are on the leading edge of using it and deploying it within your company or still wondering what it might look like. I will share some quick tips for how to leverage generative AI to get up to speed more quickly, particularly if you are new in business analysis. Okay, so what we're talking about really before we dive into the framework, I said it was about how you do this in such a way that adds value. So before we go in, what does a value-driven business analyst look like? And I really want to spend some time thinking about that. In my mind, we reduce rework by ensuring all the requirements are captured. We solve the underlying business problem. We need to know how to thrive in fast-paced environments by choosing the right techniques and using those techniques at the right times, not doing all the things, but the things that we really like, the activities that are really going to get us to where we're going the fastest, but also in the best possible way, right? We want to be cultivating credibility with a flexible yet structured approach. So I do think there's this balance between the pieces that we really need to do to add value, but also that flexibility as our teams might need something different for us on any individual project. We need to manage expectations and proactively engage our stakeholders, right? So how can we set them up for success, let them know exactly what we need for them, help them contribute in the best possible way, and we'll talk about this all throughout. And then working strategically to build momentum while minimizing risk. So in essence, it's this ability to choose the right techniques at the right time and do the analysis that's needed to make that next decision, given the context of your organization's risk tolerance. And that's a big part of what separates, I think, kind of a maybe by the book business analyst from a true value-driven business analyst, right? Always thinking, where are we going? How are we getting there? How can I help us get there most quickly, but also without sacrificing quality? So when you see this list of opportunities, are there any challenges that surface for you? You know, are there obstacles that you face to delivering this kind of value and making this kind of impact? Because I like to talk about the good parts, but I also like to dig into the real world nitty gritty. And I'm going to share some of the challenges that I see as well, pretty common, and then I'll kind of check the chat to add to that. So in kind of to just capstone all of this is the Business Analysis Manifesto. And I published this, I think the very first year I was blogging at Bridging the Gap. You know, you sit down sometimes and you just feel like you channel through the thing that needs to be said. But this is how I started to define what business analysis felt like and meant to me at the time. Out of chaos, we create order. Out of disagreement, we create alignment. Out of ambiguity, we create clarity. But most of all, we create positive change for the organizations we serve. Right? This is what we're here for. This is what positive impact looks like. This is what value looks like, is that creation of positive change for the organizations that we're working for. So as we go through this framework, I'll be sharing a lot of steps and techniques, and these are all activities that you could consider. But in the context of a specific initiative, some of them might be more relevant than others. So this is a great piece to come back to, or a touchstone to come back to. Like, does this piece make sense to me? And so I mentioned that there's challenges, right? So you are not alone. Apologies, I meant for this to animate so it kind of come in a circle, and I just had added this slide and it's all there. So we can talk about it all at once. So, you know, there are challenges, there are aggressive deadlines, right? Not enough time to do even the right focused, fast analysis. Being assigned late in the project after the important decisions are made, which often it minimizes your impact. You might find yourself in an unclear role where your business analysis overlaps with other roles, or you have additional roles layered on to your role, whether that's project management, software development, testing. Right? You might have to wear multiple hats. You might work in an environment where the stakeholders are not very engaged, where they decline your meetings, they ignore your messages, they don't have answers to your questions. And I think all of this leads us to feeling less than confident about our contribution. A lot of it is external, but when we have an aggressive deadline that we can't meet because our stakeholders aren't answering questions, it often can erode our confidence as well. And that becomes a challenge in and of itself, because when we're not super confident in our role, then it emanates out as a lack of confidence, which makes it even more difficult. So that is some of the challenges I think we face. And I would love to hear from you. What else is coming up for you? So thanks, Peter, for sharing your LinkedIn. And I'm going to share my LinkedIn at some point as well. So I haven't seen any challenges coming through. Welcome, Anastasia from the Ukraine. And everybody else. Okay, scope creep. Christy says scope creep. Yes. So that's a great one, right? Like, we start on one focus area and things become bigger. I'm actually going to share our scope template here in a bit and talk about quite a bit about scope. Anything else coming up? Tanya says, I have a poorly defined scope and a lack of readiness. Okay, So yeah, well, scope seems to be a big one. So I'm thinking lack of readiness would be lack of readiness by the organization. That might be related to stakeholders not being fully engaged. Francis says solution being agreed to before the requirements are defined. Oh yes. Oh yes. That kind of dovetails often with being assigned late in the project, right? So we already know the solution. Why don't you just come and figure out the requirements so we can move ahead? Lack of business readiness. Okay. Project extension. So kind of a project just kind of keeps going on and on. Resistance to change. Okay, and I want you to know, no, none of you are alone, right? These are all very common challenges that I hear again and again from business analysts all across the world, different industries, different types of organizations. And sometimes it's just nice to know, like, you're not the only one facing some of these challenges. And so we are going to talk about a lot of these today. Too many leaders, not enough doers, right? I think we're right in the midst, right, of being a leader and a doer, which is a really interesting and fun place to be. Okay, so as part of counteracting some of these challenges, I want to offer up the 8-step business analysis process that we teach at Bridging the Gap. And I will be going deeper into each of these steps, but for now, let's just look at the big picture. So step 1 being getting oriented. And the goal of the whole framework is to give you a credible framework and an approach that allows you to be both strategic and proactive while also guiding your project through to a successful conclusion. So getting oriented, learning enough to make an impact, and really start discovering the business objectives. Step 2, the business objectives are ensuring we know why we're doing this work. What is the business problem to be solved? What is the opportunity? Step 3 on defining scope. We'll spend a fair amount of time on this step today. I think it's where we can solve a lot of the challenges by getting a clear agreement of stakeholders on what the scope of the project or the initiative is. Step 4 on formulating the business analysis plan. So this is where we identify the deliverables that we're going to create, the timelines for those, but really important also the stakeholders that need to be involved. And this is where we start to build in some of that business stakeholder engagement by letting them know how they need to be involved. And this is just the BA plan, not the overall project plan. Step 5 is like the bulk of the work, right? It's defining the detailed requirements. So this is where you do all the techniques to take that scope and make it into an implementable set of requirements that your solution team can implement. And then from here, we really drive from pushing the project forward to more of a support role where we would support the technical implementation team, the business implementation team to make sure they know how to use the solution and update their business process to use the solution. And then finally, assessing the value of the solution, really looking at the ROI that we created through this project. You can apply this project on a major, like a huge initiative that might have multiple projects within it, or on a relatively seemingly simple request, right? The framework can scale up and down based on the type of work. It also augments any sort of agile practices. So agile tends to pick up right around step 5 there with like, give us all the user stories. Right? It doesn't mean that we don't need to know why or also where we're headed and have an overall sense of scope. And again, this is a guide, not a prescription. So you're often going to iterate through the steps, and you're often going to kind of work back and forth as you go, or trim and adjust it based on your role. So what kinds of projects can it help you on? You can use it for a system implementation or immigration or migration project when you're moving from one system to another, a data warehouse project where you might be building up in a completely new data warehouse, a reporting project, any sort of enhancement to an existing system. And what else? Like, what are the other projects that you might be working on? I always love to hear about specific projects, and I'm happy to use those as examples as we go through that can help make our time together more relevant as well. Let's see. Okay, business strategy, right? So business strategy would probably be a bit before you take this, but it would definitely inform the step 2 on business objectives and the step 3 on scope. Implementing a resourcing tool would be a great example. Identity access management would be a great example. Process design and implementation. Oh, you all are working on some really interesting stuff. Acquisition. So integrating an acquisition, I'm assuming that's what that means. Integrating a new company into your software. One of my roles as a practicing business analyst and business strategist was we had acquired 5 different companies and we were building a consolidated tech stack for them. A CRM implementation, great example. Pension dashboard, ERP implementation. Oh, you all are doing some awesome work. Okay, so let's dive in. So the very first step that we talked about is getting oriented. So you can't deliver value if you don't know where you are and where you're headed, and not all movement is movement in the right direction. So before we even start, we really need to know what does this look like? What has happened before? That's the project history, right? Often we're not starting right from the beginning. And even if we are, that project might have been talked about 2 years ago, or there was probably a conversation somewhere in an executive meeting, right? There's some sort of history before it gets to the business analyst, even when we're involved right at the beginning. We need to clarify our role. So often I have made mistakes of assuming my role was going to be one thing and then realizing it was going to be another. Not all BA roles are the same. Expectations vary really widely. So being clear on what's your role on this initiative and on this team is incredibly important, and not to make assumptions about what that might be. Identifying the project stakeholders or the primary stakeholders that need to be engaged early on, and then also any existing systems and processes. So often at the beginning, we might need to just do some analysis to understand the current state. Particularly, I see a lot of people who are doing ERP implementations potentially invest months in that activity of understanding their current systems and processes before moving to the new one. That's not always the case. Sometimes we're just like rip and replace and like figure out all the details as we go. But sometimes you might spend a few months here. Often though, it's really a high level understanding of what systems and processes do we have in place today, so that we can start to see the context of where we might go during the project. So then the next step was step 2 of discovering the primary business objectives. And if our goal is to deliver value, we really need to understand what value looks like in the context of this work. And that means discovering the objectives for the project. Why are we doing this, right? What are we here for? What does the outcome look like? And when I say business objectives, what's on here, this slide here, this could be called many different things, right? Objectives can go by many different names. You might call them business requirements, business need, desired outcomes, return on investment, key performance indicator, right? And they can also be included in any number of documents. So often they might be in a scope statement, in a business case, in a project charter, in a project plan. And so thinking about, where does this happen today in your organization? Is there a deliverable that has visibility in your project or in your process where business objectives are included? And if not, often the most straightforward way to bring some focus on this is to add that section to an existing document. So one client I worked with had proposed adding business objectives to their project charter. They're like, at one point, there was a section for business objectives, and somewhere along the way, it seems like it's gotten dropped, right? So instead of proposing, say, an entirely new like business objectives document, or even the scope statement that I'm going to show you in a bit, they had a lot of that information already in the project charter, and adding that section on business objectives would bring visibility to it in a document that was already being used by the team, as well as give the BA a place to contribute to that charter. And that made it a lot easier to get approval and to kind of work it into their existing process. Okay. So what do business objectives look like? Here's some examples. So this is a theoretical mobile application for a home insurance company that would support the claims process. So we could have an objective for reducing the average time that an agent spends preparing to submit a claim, reducing follow-up calls to check on a claim status by homeowners, reducing follow-up calls by contractors by a certain amount, and increasing adoption of homeowner use of the online web application. And Peter asks, is this analogous to a vision statement? That would be another deliverable, yes, that you might have, especially if you're in a product environment. You might have a vision statement instead of a scope statement or instead of a project plan. Yeah. Okay. So if you get stuck, I find most stakeholders, they kind of know what they want and they have an idea of why they want it, but they wouldn't necessarily articulate things coming like that, right? Like who's ever had somebody say, I want to reduce this process from 8 hours to 4, or right? They often don't come with that sort of specificity. And so I think as the BA, often our role is to propose these and to put them out there like we would a wireframe just to get feedback. I see a lot of value in this project doing this. Is that what you would see as well? Or what do you think of this objective? And allow them to give you that, yeah, kind of, but I really want this type of response. And this is also a great time to use generative AI to give them we're implementing this. I think our goal is this. What would some great objectives be for this project? And allow AI to help draft them for you. And I'm going to show you that in a bit as well. Okay. So the third piece is defining scope. So we talked about getting oriented, defining the business objectives. Once we know why we're doing what we're doing, the next step is to figure out what the scope is, what the solution scope is. And the goal with scope is still to have a high-level view, but to really make sure that the business needs are tangible in a way that multiple project team participants can envision their contribution to the project and to the implementation. So you will be involved. I have defining here, and that's actually not the best word. You're defining it in the sense that it's a very collaborative effort, right? You would be maybe writing it out or modeling it out, kind of facilitating it and defining it in the sense that you're taking the input and the brainstorming that a team does and making sure that is well defined and well understood, right? So defining that solution approach in the sense of from a very collaborative approach with both stakeholders from both the business and the technology teams with those business objectives in mind. And you want to make sure you're considering both business focused parts of the solution. So where are we updating business processes, as well as the technology aspects of the solution. The next piece would be drafting a scope statement and reviewing it with your key business and technology stakeholders. And that's the piece where I actually want to demo for you, as well as show some of the things that I've been teaching our participants to do with AI. So just give me a second here to switch my screen, or switch what I'm sharing. Sorry, rogue browser windows here. So I think if I just drag it over, are you seeing the scope statement now and not my slides? Okay, good. I wasn't sure if I had to reshare. Thank you. Emmanuel asked, could this business objectives be generated from the problem statement? Yeah. So if you have a problem statement, I always think it's always great to give AI or any tool, right, from some context. So one, you could put your problem statement into AI and ask it to generate business objectives, or you could obviously read that and use that. So usually a problem statement would have a so that or in order to, and that's where the business objectives live. So the scope statement template that is one of our offerings from Bridging the Gap. We actually offer this as a free download. So in a minute, I will share that link. But right now, I just wanted to share the template with you. So it includes the project overview, which is a short description, the expected benefits, and all this blue text here is annotated text. The list of capabilities. So this would be both the business process capabilities and the software capabilities. You also want to look at any assumptions that you're making, any constraints on the project. And I find it's really useful to identify constraints first, because the constraints often give you more creativity. So my daughter often will do this. She calls it a 3 marker challenge, and she has like, 50 or 60 markers, and she'll draw 3 with her eyes closed and then draw a picture. And what she comes up with when she's using only 3 markers is completely different than anything she would have drawn if she had all 50 markers at her disposal, right? So like constraints really do encourage creativity, and understanding your constraints, that's we need to use this existing system, we need to follow this regulation, right? There's a lot of different constraints to be aware of. And then finally, having a very clear out of scope item as well. So let me just quickly show you. So with an annotated template like this, one of the ways that I'm teaching people to use AI is to actually upload it to AI. So that template has a bunch of instructional text. So essentially you can use it to train AI to get what you're looking for. And then here I've kind of given it a very high level, just a couple of sentences. We're implementing a waste tracking system. I've uploaded the scope statement template. This is one we use in all of our organizations to scope new projects. Could you please create this? And AI did a fairly good job. I also added, and also let me know what questions I should be thinking about, right? So that's an additional prompt. So in addition to drafting a scope statement that I could use to build this document, each section also has questions to consider, which is a great tool for discovery and elicitation. And so it's a great starting point. So I'm going to share, if you are interested, a link to this template that you can download, which is totally for free, in the chat. It's a free resource. It also comes with a bit of a tutorial with some more details around how to do scope, or how to create a statement like that. Okay. And just a tip, and you can do that with any of the templates that you might have. You could also use an example for, you could upload an example to train AI as well. I found though when you upload examples, often it uses the example, like the content of the example, right? AI is not yet always great at extracting the instruction behind the example of what you're trying to give. And so a lot of that content, even if it's in a completely different project, might make its way into what it creates. So I think an annotated template that's very clear of like what goes in each section is a better training tool for AI in general. So from there, you also, as part of the scope step, want to be prioritizing requirements, reviewing and validating the statement with multiple stakeholders, and making sure that everybody is truly aligned, right? And then at the end, looking at the business case. Does this project still make sense? Right? And often we can get so lost in like what we're trying to achieve and what it's going to take to get there. And if we're not really clear about our constraints, like, oh, wait, this just became a 12-month project that really has this much value. Like, does this still make sense? Or do we really need to revisit the scope in order for it to have a positive ROI, a positive business case? Okay. So what I just wanted to show you, if you see in that template, there is a section for visual models, right? And one high-level business process is a great model. Business concept model is a great model to add. But one of my favorites is a system context diagram. And it's great when we're looking at what interactions does this system have or not have with other systems within the scope of this project. I find a lot of scope overruns, a lot of projects that kind of keep getting extended due to lack of scope. Often it's because we miss these interactions up front, and they add a lot of complexity to add later on. All right, so that brings us to step 4. So at this point, we have our overall scope. We know where we're headed. We have a high level view of where we're going. And it's up to us as the VA to create a plan that will get us there from a requirements perspective. This is not the entire project plan. It is the plan for the business analysis effort. And it's going to identify what types of deliverables that you'll be creating. So given the scope and given the project methodology, are you a more traditional organization or a more agile organization? Are you, given your role, are you responsible for the data modeling, or is there somebody else doing that? Are you responsible for like a more detailed functional spec, or might there be a systems analyst you're working with doing that, right? Like all these things are things you flesh out when you're figuring out your role. But you're putting together a plan of the deliverables that you are responsible for creating. And then you're getting specific about what specific deliverables there are. So if you know you're creating, say, business processes and use cases, what specific use cases and what specific business processes will clarify that plan. And I'm going to show you an example here in a minute. The other piece of this is how stakeholders are involved, right? So we want to be proactively managing their expectations about their involvement. So they can be like, oh, wait, no, I'm going on vacation at this particular time, or I don't have the bandwidth to do what you're expecting me to do. And then finally, setting timelines. And a lot of BAs resist timelines. We work in so many unknowns, and that's where clarifying assumptions is important, as well as adjusting those timelines as we go. But we need to start with some sort of timeline and proposal, because in the absence of that, somebody else is going to make up some dates for us, right? And those are probably not going to be as well thought out as what we would give ourselves. So the plan could look something like this. Where you have your list of deliverable names, your estimated effort, the duration, the start and end date, and the stakeholders. One thing that I did actually in creating this plan was another kind of tip for using AI is once you have your estimated effort and the duration, you can put in the the estimated effort, duration, and the dependencies. All right, you can copy the table. So AI will actually allow you to copy a table and will give you a table back, even though it's a text tool. And you can give it a start date and allow it to figure out the rest of the dates for you based on those dependencies. And then sometimes you'll notice like, oh, I missed a dependency or there's too much overlap there. I also like to tell it as a BA working so many hours a week, right? So it's also kind of averaging out how many hours you actually have to dedicate to that project. So you need to give it a lot of context for that prompt, but it can give some dates for you just to help you with that planning process. Okay. Let's see. Tatelio says, if the project is a process transformation or a complicated end, would you still have a clear plan or could it be updated? So you would want to build in the deliverables you know about. And you would want to, I think, at least put placeholders in for the things you think you might need to do. And then document your assumptions, not just document, but like get really clear on your assumptions, right? So if you are in a big transformation and there's some very big unknowns, you want to build in buffer for that, but you also want to explain why you're building in the buffer and what maybe a best case and a worst case scenario look like so that you're giving your project manager some pieces to go on. And then what factors would allow you to hit the best case and what risks would push you even maybe past the worst case. Okay, so you're taking it out of this is just so complicated, I have no idea when I'm going to be done, to here's what I know, here's what I don't know, here's also a milestone in which I might know the rest of it. So you might chunk it out that way as well, like your first phase of the plan that then allows you to inform your next phase of the plan. I think we want to put something in place. Okay. All right. I'm so glad that was helpful. And great question as well. I'm sure a lot of us face that. Okay. All right. So we've done our plan. Now we actually need to discover, review, analyze, and review and validate all the requirements. So I don't want to minimize this step, but I also feel like this is the place where most, like so many talks happen, right? We want to like on this piece. So this is where we go in and start working the plan, discovering the details. What does the community want from that feature? Analyzing, putting it into some sort of structured document, whether that's a use case or a user story or a business process map, creating a first draft of one or more of those deliverables, reviewing it with your stakeholders, asking questions, getting feedback, and filling in any gaps. And you go through that process again and again on every deliverable in your plan until you're done. And here's just, some of the techniques that we teach at Bridging the Gap and that often also analysts find helpful in coming up with their plans, right? So when I think about what does a business analyst need to do to really look at the solution, I think of these three different perspectives along the top, these sets of techniques: the business level, or what the end-to-end business process is, how this is how you ensure you're solving the right problem, that you're thinking about it from a business or an end user perspective first. The software level, or how to get everyone on the same page about what the actual software requirements are, what the software needs to do, not how it needs to be built. And then the information or data modeling level, which is where, this is absolutely essential for those of you on system integration or migration projects. It's often overlooked as well. And again, this isn't about building the database, and it's not about analyzing the data. It is about what pieces of information does the business need to, or what pieces of information does the software need to manage in order for the business to do business the way they want to do. And so understanding how key concepts relate, what key elements are stored using a data dictionary, and if you're moving data from one system to another, what data element goes to what data element from a business perspective. It's a place where BAs can add a ton of value because often those decisions are left to technical stakeholders who might not have the full context of the business. And then the other part of our blueprint is the framework, which is the core of what we're talking about today. So I won't need to go through that with you again. Okay. All right. I just want to check how we're doing on time. All right. So yes, so we're getting close here, and I definitely, if you have other questions, feel free to get them into the Q&A as well. So we should be wrapping up probably about quarter to the top of the hour, and then I'd love to have additional questions. So again, I just want to reinforce the opportunities to use AI for some of these things, and some of the workflows that I've seen a lot of leverage from a individual productivity perspective for business analysts is using it to create a rough draft, right? I showed you that with the scope statement. And sorry, I left out our link to our templates, but I'll get that in the chat when we're ready. You can also upload your current document and ask for questions or ask for revisions. So if you had, say, a use case or a business process, like, can you tell me what questions I should be asking? Right? Can you tell me some questions I might want to ask? Could you suggest any improvements to this process? And I should have said this from the beginning. I feel like most people know this by now, but obviously if you are uploading your company specific information, you want to make sure that's in compliance with any security requirements in your organization. And when possible, use your company's internal tools versus, uploading it to a third party that does not have those restrictions. So you want to make sure to be complying with any policies. You could also ask for opportunities to improve. So you could revise it. I've also had success if it suggests opportunities. All right, great. I want to make this change. Go through this use case and implement anything necessary to implement this change, and it will actually update that for you, which can be really useful. So just some ways to use it to gain a little bit of efficiency. Okay, so just to take a quick step back, we've talked about getting oriented, primary business objectives, defining scope, our BA plan, our detailed requirements. We're moving on to step 6. But what really happens here is like the BA is really like pushing or driving the process forward. And then there's a bit of an energy shift where the ball is really on other teams to move the project forward, but we are still essential in supporting and collaborating to move things forward. Okay. And Peter asked, are you planning to cover this in the new book? Yes. So the whole book is arranged around the 8-step framework. So thank you, Peter, for that.
Excellent.
Yeah. Okay. So then we support the technical implementation. So this is a great opportunity for BAs to learn how to learn more about the capabilities of the technology, build relationships with the technology the technology team. We can be reviewing designs. We always want to make sure we're reviewing designs with an eye of, does it fulfill the requirements, right? Are there opportunities to meet additional business needs without increasing the technical scope, versus I have a better way to do this than you do, right? Because most technical people don't take too well to that. We can also review test plans and test cases, which again, making sure they represent a clear understanding of the requirements, sharing any data or business scenarios that we might have picked up during discovery when our testers weren't in the room, answering any questions to clarify the requirements, and then managing issues and changes. So I've never been on a project where we didn't think something was possible until the developer actually got into the tool or into the code. And then what we thought would be good was not, what would work did not work in reality. And so we have to revisit maybe some of our software requirements to meet the business need in a different way and get buy-in around that. Step 7 is the same kind of process, but on the business side. So one of the worst, not worst, but one of the most interesting examples of a project I worked on was they had implemented a document management system, and I was not part of that project, but the business users weren't trained on the system. It wasn't quite configured to meet their needs. And when they brought me in to figure it out, like they had, instead of using a paper process that was passed around from everybody's inbox to manage it, they knew they had to use the document management system, but instead they were uploading and downloading and printing things multiple times. So they were using the document management system, but it was actually creating more paper, more work, kind of the reverse of the outcome that they actually wanted. And so this is where really ensuring the business is ready to use that solution is such an important part of the business analysis value proposition. And this can look like the process analysis, it can look like training, it can look like making sure all of the assets that they might need, like an email template or a form, right? Making sure all those assets are updated so that the new software can be used the way it was intended and deliver the ROI. So this is really where everything comes full circle. And so often I know we're pressured to like move on to the next thing, but this is where the real impact is. And this is also where you can start to see what are the future opportunities that give you your next set of projects to work on. Okay. And then we get to the end and we get to celebrate all of our awesome successes. If you've been following me at all, you know how much I love to celebrate wins and successes, as well as wins and successes within our community. But like so much happens throughout the course of a project, right? We work through details, we solve problems, we change requirements, we build relationships, we manage changes. People change the way they work, and we need to step back and look at the big picture and help everyone look at the big picture. I think often we come to the end of a project with this sense of like, thank goodness it's over. We didn't get what we wanted, but it's done, right? But we also it's also a great opportunity to say, what value did we create? Even if it wasn't what we initially envisioned, even if we missed the mark in some ways, we created some sort of positive outcome for our organization. And uncovering what that is, sharing it visibly, creates a ton of project positive momentum within an organization. And also value for you as the business analyst in terms of how people see your role, how people see the project team, how people see the entire technology team. And so taking some time to really look at the progress, communicate those results, as well as suggest any follow-up projects is a great way to have a capstone. In this stage, I also recommend evaluating your own business analysis practice and looking at what deliverables actually helped the project. Where did I maybe kind of get lost in the details or kind of lose the sight of the forest for the trees, right? Where did I get off track and follow a tangent? What could I do differently in the future, with the guise of always wanting to add more value? Okay, and that brings us again to the framework, which we've walked through a few times. And then I just want to leave here before we go into Q&A with one of my favorite mantras. On every successful project, you'll find a business analyst. They may not have the title, but they are doing this work. They're understanding the business objectives, they're clarifying scope, they're collaborating with business and tech stakeholders to create a shared understanding. They're supporting the implementation and celebrating the results. This is how you drive value and amplify your impact. And thank you so much for the work that you're doing as business analysts. I have deep appreciation for all the systems and processes that I interact with every day that are designed by great business analysts. Thank you for that. All right, and with that, we have time for questions.
Well, a very practical question so far. A few people asking because they joined halfway through. They asked about the recording. So the recording will be made available within a few days in the same event page. We send an email around when that is done, so you know it's there. And we have someone asking if we will, HT, if you will be able to share the slides, Laura.
Yes, I'm happy to share the slides.
Earlier in the session, Oi, he asked whether the scope statement is the same thing as a boss card.
I'm going to just take a look at that word. I saw that question come in.
Yeah, that is not something I'm familiar on my day-to-day as either.
Boss card. I am not sure. I'm not familiar with that term either. If you want to provide a little more context on that. But again, it's less about the template. Like I mean, obviously I like the template. That's why we share it at Pitching the Gap, but it's not necessarily about using that template. It's about, are the sections in this template visible in some way in some sort of document that your company or your project uses. So if it's all in there, then go for it. And if it's adopted already by your organization, right? So often it feels like too much to bring in something new. Whereas if we tweak what exists today and bring in the sections that we think really need to be there, often that's just an easier pathway to get where we want to go.
There is a question that came just now from an anonymous participant. Where will your new book be available, Laura?
Where or when?
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 Well, they said where, but I probably when.
Yes, it will
Yes.
certainly be on Amazon. And I'm looking also, I know there's some resistance to Amazon now, so we're always looking for where else can we make it available. As an independent self-publisher, it's really hard to access a lot of the other stores. So most likely Amazon, and possibly as early as May or June, also possibly as late as September. So I'm in the copy editing stage, and we'll just have to see how a few pieces.
Oh, that is great. So definitely around summer.
Yeah.
A second question from Christy Wallace. What is a typical schedule to provide progress to the stakeholders? Do they set that schedule or is it up to the BA? What would you answer, Laura?
Do they set this? Yeah, so often that is a great question to ask as you are building relationships in the beginning. So as you're starting to meet with those stakeholders during step one, asking what kind of updates would be helpful to you, right? So when would you like to know what? Like a weekly update, a monthly update, a daily update, right? And often definitely sitting down, if you have a project or a functional manager, sometimes that's the same person, sometimes they're separate. What is the expectation of their reporting for you, and having a conversation about that. But I think if you don't have, like, you think about also what you're comfortable with. What is going to allow you to manage expectations, to communicate progress without slowing you down, and maybe propose that as a starting point, and then ask if they want something a little different. So I don't think there's a typical schedule. I think weekly often is a good approach, but sometimes that can be a little bit too laborious depending on how much work you're doing on this particular project.
Well, we have two questions coming via the chat.
Okay.
Can we use the template from Hina Argawal? Can we use the template for non-technical transformations too? More often, system technical transformation is part of the bigger initiative. So the question is, can we use the template for non-technical?
Yes, the scope template. Yes, I think it would be a great template for non-technical implementations, because and I have redone that capability section a few times. It used to be features, right? And features is more of a software focused. But how it is now is it's capabilities, and business functions enable capabilities, business roles enable capabilities, information assets enable capabilities, business processes enable capabilities. So you could list the capabilities that the business is enabling. It does not have to have a system technical transformation. And the entire process that we walk through, besides like supporting the implementation team, really is relevant even if you're not on a software project.
That's great. Thank you, Laura. Another question from the chat, and then we have another one on the Q&A. Are there any suggestions for tools to use for user points and to evaluate scope versus capacity?
I do not have suggestions around tools for that. No. I'm familiar with Agile in terms of how the BA works with it, but I've used story points, but I've not used a tool around it. I could see how you would be able to use AI if you trained it on how your team defines story points. I don't think there's like a universally accepted, like you would need to train AI and then use it to draft that first or next. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And now it's a question from an anonymous participant. Is a BA usually the one doing the process mapping, or do they have the responsibility of a project manager?
The process mapping, yeah, that typically is, roles can happen in any way. So I never like to tell somebody that they're doing something wrong because they're doing something not in their role. But I think business analysis is a perfect place to do process mapping. Most of the BAs I work with do process mapping. And the project manager is more focused on the schedule, the larger budget, and it's like larger scope and kind of the overall project vision, and not so much in the details of the process mapping. That being said, a lot of project managers really are business analysts and they love to do this stuff and they have trouble letting go of it. So I wouldn't be surprised if somebody was working with a project manager who wanted to do the process maps because they're fun.
Yeah, that is great. I tend to leave the project manager side if I can do it without. I quite like to be a hands-on full-time BA.
Yeah.
But well, back to the questions. What they said is that whether you can we use the process framework for the commercial off-the-shelf projects?
100%. So the piece that gets lighter is often your detailed requirements are lighter, and more business focused. So less software requirements, but business process focused as well as data focused if you're moving data or integrating that off the shelf system. But you still want to be clear of what are the business objectives? Why are we implementing this solution? What is the scope of implementation? What systems will it integrate with it? What processes will it touch? Like all of those steps we talked about are still extremely relevant.
Another question. In your opinion, do you see the BA position phasing out with more businesses relying on AI?
I think as business analysts, we need to be using AI, which is why I'm always incorporating it in some way into my talks. The skill set we offer in terms of getting people on the same page, in terms of asking questions, facilitating conversations, coming up with creative ideas. Like there's so much we do that is at this point, and hopefully for a while in the future, not replaceable by AI, but we need to be using it in the ways that it can be supportive of our work so that we're always one step ahead of the next AI development and how to bring that into our organization. So I really do. I don't think the BA role goes away by any means, but we do necessarily need to be looking at how we can use it more proactively.
Yeah. Okay. And I would have thought, I'd say that with the benefit of time, having experienced many changes in technology in the workplace. So the same way that we, in the past, for example, maybe for some of us, the first training to get into the workplace was to learn to use a typewriter. So look how much technology we have to learn to handle and embed in whatever roles we have been. And for example, I have been in 3 different careers, so I have to use technology and applying different concepts in industries and roles. So yes, I think with the BA it's the same. And to obtain the benefit we want of business analysis from an AI, we need to use it with a business analyst mindset. Otherwise, we don't get the output we need. isn't it?
Yeah, and if your organization is leading with AI, right, the business analyst can start to ask, where do the capabilities of AI fit within our business processes? Where are the biggest opportunities for an AI agent? And mapping that business process and then situating the AI pieces within it uh, gives a lot of context and is going to make those AI implementations so much more valuable. So, I mean, that's one is to be using it in our work, but then the next, as you were mentioning, is also how can our business leverage it in other roles? Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah.
Well, so we have now answered all the questions we had in stock. We have a couple of minutes, well, a few more minutes with Laura. Does anyone have an urgent question you want to fire on?
I'm going to share my LinkedIn if you would. I would always love connecting with you. I know a lot of you I'm connected with already. I see a lot of familiar names, but please feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. Oh. I think I saw a question about change and also UAT. We don't have a new question.
Uh, was it in the chat?
Yeah, I
Should the
can,
BA lead UAT? Yes, there was a question
yeah,
by Tirthi Patnaik. So should the
yeah, I
BA lead?
think, it is one of those, I don't think it's formally part of the business analyst role. I think we can add a lot of value by doing it. The experiences that I've had where I am leading a UAT process, I have become much more intimately like involved at the business process and understand it at a whole new level by watching the business users use the test system and guiding them through that process. It's also a huge part of the change effort and the training. So it goes really well together. But on a large project, like you might need somebody else in that role, or there might be somebody who is like from the testing team who's already in charge of that role, in which case you want to collaborate with them versus own it. So again, it's not like a right wrong. It's what works for your skill set, what works for the team, and the responsibilities you have. And I think the other question was around change management. And this is essentially some of change management, though change management as well is a much bigger discipline than business analysis. But at the end of the day, that step 7 is around managing the change in the organization. So there's a lot of tools we could pull from the change management profession as well.
Yes, well, Laura, we can only thank you very much for being available to speak with us tonight. It's been a very rich session with many practical insights and suggestions, and the structure you provided is definitely absolutely applicable to any contest we step in as a VA, regardless of the proportion of the change we are dealing with. So thank you for taking the time. We really appreciate. We really thank everybody who were able to be with us tonight. Please continue to be in touch. If you'd like to let us know how the session worked for you, I'm going to share a link to a forms. It's a feedback form. Let us know how the session worked for you, how we can improve, what you would like to see in the future. And continue in touch. Visit our website. There are a few more sessions available, a few more events going on. If people are in the UK, in the London, Milton Keynes area, there is a face-to-face event next week for communities of practice. So if you can, it will be a pleasure to see you in future events. And I thank you, everyone, very much. And thank you, Laura. I really appreciate your.
Thank you so much for having me and for organizing this, Adriana, and for all of you for being here. Really
You are all
appreciate
very
it.
welcome. My pleasure. Thank you so much.
Awesome.
Thanks, Laura. See you soon.
See you, John.